Serious teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing your student has ever done? A student of mine, 13 to 14, was brutally murdered by his cousin, 19, because he ratted out the cousin for having weed. My student's family took in the cousin because he didn't have anywhere to stay after moving to the US. My student's parents were in South America burying my student's grandfather. The cousin tied/duct taped up my student and beat him in the head with a hammer, while my student reportedly said, "I don't want to die, man." In court, the cousin said he couldn't stop once he started. The day before, the student told me he thought he did really well on his end of the state standardized test. He had been worried he wouldn't finish by the end of the day and would need his high school-aged big sister to come pick him up. He finished just in time and told me I didn't have to call his sister. I still wonder if that small difference in taking more time on the test would have changed anything. Consequently, his sister stayed late at school and found her brother dead that night. She couldn't go back into the house after that, and I think the family moved shortly after. We found out a few weeks later that he passed the state exam he took the day he died with honors, meaning he did even better than average. This was a huge success because he was a struggling student. It was a small school and the students had known each other since first grade. One of the hardest days of my life was the day we had to share news of this kid's death with students and then call their parents to ask them to come get their own kid because the trauma was so terrible. I will never forget the conversations I had that day. There was no memorial or funeral. A lot of loose ends weren't tied related to grief because of that. Few years back I taught second grade. An 8-year-old boy would always bring little treats for me in the morning like candy, a cookie or even these tiny animal toys. This one morning he came to my desk and told me he had a gift for me. He opened his bag and pulled out a big brassiere and gave it to me. I was speechless, took it and put it in a drawer and just said thank you. Called in his mom and told her about this. Kid never gave me gifts again. Middle school English teacher. I had a student pull a tooth out of his own head to get out of silent reading. It was a baby tooth, thank God, but according to mom it was not loose. He just sat at his desk and grabbed it and yanked it back and forth and popped it out and came up to the desk bleeding all over himself and said he wasn't able to read anymore, so could he just put his head down. He was sent to the nurse and mom was horrified. Kids in my mom's class tried to poison another little girl they were having a feud with. They tampered with her snack and put things like sharp staples and hand sanitizer in it. They also put pencil lead in thinking it would harm her. Obviously ultimately harmless, but the intent was there. I'm glad one of the little boys involved came up to my mom and let her know what the plan was out of guilt. They're in 4th grade, old enough to know better and to know what eating harmful things can do to a person. I used to teach at an alternative high school. So a lot of my students were kids on probation, kids from areas with a lot of gang violence. Many of them had issues related to the fact that they were born drug addicted, that kind of thing. I had a student who I had worked hard with to build a good report. One Friday, he looked me in the eyes and told me, completely calmly, that I shouldn't come to work on Monday. He kept telling me that he didn't want me to be there Monday. When I finally pressed him for why I should not come to work Monday, he told me that he was going to blow this shit up. I said, "You know I need to report this, right?" He told me to do what I had to do. He was arrested right out of my classroom and I had to be interviewed by the police. It was honestly really traumatic. I ended up calling out Monday, even though I knew nothing was going to happen, because my anxiety went through the roof. I called out a lot after that and found a new job shortly after, but I still have a great deal of compassion for that student. I think about him often. I hope he's okay. I had a 5th grader who I swore was sociopathic. His father had deported the boy's mother because he wanted a new wife, if that gives some context to the living situation. The boy would say very aggressive sexual things, moon students on the bus, etc. But the predatory behavior was the worst. He'd wait as students left the room, so he could be next to last, turn off the light and backhand the last kid in line, often his own cousin who was his most common victim. I had to keep an eye on him constantly. He'd also steal electronics and things from his friends, or force his cousin to do so in case they were caught. CPS. Yes, CPS was involved. This was almost a decade ago, so I'm not sure what happened to him. Sensitive material. Sorry if this upsets anyone. I'm a special education teacher, and during my student teaching I had a lovely, 16-year-old girl with Down syndrome. She was a quiet, reserved girl who often was not well groomed. This is something that we worked on with her at school. She was gaining weight and tired a lot, and was discovered that she had not had a period for several months. The school nurse examined her and realized she was nearly 6 months pregnant. After an investigation, her younger brother, 11 years old, was having sex with her and got her pregnant. I believe he went to a juvenile center. I moved out of the country, so I'm not sure whatever happened to her. I do know she gave birth and the baby was adopted. I always think about that girl often. At the first school that I taught at, I had a girl come up to me one day and say, "Robert has a knife." I pulled Robert into the hallway to talk with him about it. He said that he didn't have a knife, but did have a box cutter. I asked him why he had it and he said, "Because I'm tired of Chris." Chris was an annoying suck-up, but wasn't really bad or mean to other kids. I asked Robert what he was planning on doing to Chris. He said, "I'm going to get him in the bathroom." I usually took the class to the restroom after lunch, but I didn't that day because they were being rowdy in the hallway. I took Robert to the office, and after hearing the story the principal chewed him out. She then called Robert's mom, and she chewed him out on the phone. Here's the kicker. Robert knew that he was in serious trouble. He knew that what he was planning was wrong. He just didn't care. Not in a false bravado macho type way. He literally didn't care. I hate to predict a kid's future criminal endeavors, but that kid scares me. By the way, Robert was 8 years old at the time. I used to teach a pet class to 3 to 5 year olds. I had this one kid who used to come with his friend from kinder. His friend's mother apologized to me numerous times and said she never would have offered to bring him if she knew what he was like. More than once I had to evacuate the rest of the kids from the gym because this 3-year-old would be running around the gym screaming frickin' cant at the top of his lungs while trying to punch, kick or headbutt other kids. You never knew what would set him off. If you asked him to kick a ball he was equally likely to kick another student or the ball. One time he went so violent that I couldn't get him away from the other kids and ended up wrapping him up in the firm cuddle technique, which they definitely don't teach teachers about anymore. I basically dropped him to his knees with me on my knees behind him, arms wrapped around his arms and his chest. The only part he could move was his head, and he kept trying to smash the back of his head into my face. But the worst part was the laughter. He normally had a vague, empty look on his face, but when he was trying to hurt someone he would scream with laughter wearing the biggest shit-eating grin. I only had him for 10 sessions once a week, but holy frick, I will never forget that kid. My mom had a girl in her grade 4 class one year who was oppositional defiant, and it was so sad to see, because she was honestly such a neat kid, and we had lots of fun together when I would visit the class and help out. I never had an issue with her up to this point, because I wasn't an authority figure in her eyes, just an older teenager there to hang out and do art projects with the class in a very casual way. Just once I witnessed her anger when I asked her politely, but sternly, to put away her scissors because they weren't necessary for the assignment. She wasn't listening and was pretending to cut other kids' stuff, and then she lost it. I thought she'd run at me with the scissors. She looked at me like I had caused the biggest betrayal, and it was just pure anger. Honestly, the only time I thought to myself, holy shit, you actually can be possessed by the devil. Taught preschool for a couple years. Had a 3-year-old in my class who was new to the school. He was cute as a button, the perfect blonde hair and bright blue eyes with rosy red cheeks. He was a nightmare. He used to just randomly get up and run around the room smacking other kids in the face. He got up one time to come over and punch me and my co-teacher in the stomach. I was able to stop him and put him in a halt that they taught us at my preschool. His parents acted like nothing was wrong. They refused to see that their child had serious issues. The final straw was one day during crafts. He was playing at a different center in the classroom and got up and ran towards a little girl I was helping. She had her back turned to him and he grabbed a triangle-shaped building magnet and stabbed her in the neck so hard it cut her. I have never reacted so quickly. I grabbed him up from behind by his arms and immediately walked him to the hallway and down to the main office. I was done. I told my director that he was either out of my class today or I quit. His parents withdrew him that day before we could start the process of expulsion. But my director still got him on some list that basically stays on his school record that he's had these outbursts. IDK what happened to him, but I'm sure I'll see him on the news someday.